The Governess. Scandal during the season. Book 1. Synopsis. When her father's honor turns into debt. Vivian Aldridge is sent to serve as governess at the prestigious yet merciless Blackthorne Hall. There, under the charge of the enigmatic and libertine Earl Gabriel Blackthorne, Vivian must teach young Lady Evelyn how to navigate a society that neither forgives nor forgets. Amid masked balls, whispered secrets, and glances that burn hotter than words, Vivian becomes an uncomfortable presence, too educated to be ignored, too humble to be accepted. As intrigues pile up and the lines between duty and desire blur, Vivian must face a world where every mistake carries consequences and every choice a price. Can a woman without a title defy an entire society without losing what she loves most? The Governess is the first novel in the Scandal during the season saga. A story of forbidden love, pride, and female resilience amidst the upper echelons of society. Welcome to Whispers by Maga Audiobooks. I invite you to listen to this beautiful story, the first installment of the trilogy, Scandal during the season. Make yourselves comfortable, the magic is about to begin. The Governess, Book 1. Prologue. London. 1815. Night fell with a veil of mist over the cobbled streets, while the lamplight barely reached the shadowed corners where some fates were sealed without their knowing. In a smoke-filled room of empty promises, Lord Sebastian Blackmore, Earl of Ravenshill, watched with cold indifference as yet another player lost what little dignity he had left. The cards, poorly shuffled, spelled the ruin of Rupert Aldridge, a gentleman long past his prime, with no lands, no honor, and no coin to cover his debt. Only one desperate hand left to play. "I have no gold," Rupert admitted, wiping sweat from his upper lip. "But I have something more valuable. My daughter." A heavy silence fell over the table. Blackmore raised an eyebrow, amused and skeptical. "You're offering me your daughter as payment?" "No. As a maid. Educated. Obedient. She can serve in your household. In whatever way you deem appropriate. She's all I have." And it was then that, without knowing it, Vivian Aldridge was sold. Chapter 1. The Debt. The rain fell furiously over the rooftops of the old Aldridge residence, as if the sky itself wanted to erase that night from the memory of the world. The wind beat against the shutters with insistence, and lightning lit up the damp walls of a house that had once known better days. Vivian sat in the main parlor, her back straight and her hands folded in her lap. The fire in the hearth barely managed to soften the cold seeping through the stone floors. She was still dressed with decorum, but the edges of her skirt showed the wear of use, and the lace on her sleeves, though clean, spoke of another time. "Father?" she asked when she heard the creak of the front door. There was no answer. Footsteps echoed down the hallway like a warning. Slowly, Mr. Aldridge appeared in the doorway. His face was pale, soaked from the rain, and his eyes, always restless, did not dare meet hers. "Vivian," he began, removing his hat, "we have a visitor." Behind him stepped in a tall man, his dark coat dripping water onto the wooden floor. His bearing was proud, and his expression carried a blend of boredom and arrogance. His eyes, a steely gray, landed on Vivian with the coldness of someone assessing an object. "Lord Ashford Blackthorne," her father announced. "Earl of Blackthorne Hall." Vivian rose politely and curtsied. There was a tightness in her throat, as if her body already sensed what her mind refused to accept. "My lord," she greeted, her voice steady. Ashford did not reply. He simply observed her in silence, as if calculating her precise worth in some invisible currency. "She's just as you described," he finally said to Mr. Aldridge. "Better. Even." Vivian frowned. "Father, what is this man talking about?" Mr. Aldridge avoided her gaze. He walked over to the fireplace, poured himself a glass of brandy with trembling hands, and drank it in one gulp. Vivian, my dear, he said, his voice breaking. I made a reckless choice. A wager. At the gaming table. I didn't mean to, but the cards, and there were no more lands, nothing left. She took a step back. What have you done? Lord Ashford spoke for him. Your father owed me a considerable sum. Tonight he played his final hand. He offered you. A cold silence took hold of the room. Only the crackling of the flames and the rain tapping against the windows could be heard. He offered me? As payment. Ashford stepped closer. His hands clasped behind his back. Not as a wife. Of course. I have no interest in marriage. But I do have a younger sister. Not yet introduced to society. She needs a lady to guide her. To accompany her. To serve as an example. Someone who knows how to behave. But has few ambitions. You, from what I've been told, are a perfect fit. And if I refuse? You have nowhere to go. Her father interjected desperately. If you don't agree, he can have me sent to debtor's prison. Vivian, my child, please. She looked at him as one looks at a stranger. That trembling man, hunched by the fire, was not the same father who had taught her to read poetry. He was a coward. A traitor. She turned her gaze to Lord Ashford, who held her stare without the slightest hint of apology. And if I accept? She asked quietly. Ashford narrowed his eyes. You won't be treated as a servant. My sister will be your responsibility. You'll have lodging, proper dresses, even a modest personal allowance. But don't expect to be treated as nobility. You are not a guest. You are a settled debt. Vivian's pride burned like a flame beneath her skin. But she did not cry. She did not plead. She lifted her chin and met the Earl's gaze without flinching. Then I'll uphold my part of the agreement. But I will not bow to you, not today. Not ever. For the first time. A flicker of surprise crossed Lord Ashford's face. Perfect. He said at last. We leave at dawn. And without waiting for a reply, he turned on his heel and disappeared through the door, leaving behind a silence heavy with broken promises and sealed fates. Vivian remained still. In that moment, she knew her life no longer belonged to her. But her will, her dignity, and her heart were still hers to give. Chapter 2. The Journey. Dawn arrived shrouded in a heavy mist that clung to the fields like a morning veil. The Aldridge house looked even more somber under the grey light, as if it knew that morning would strip it of its last remnant of dignity. Vivian descended the stairs with steady steps, carrying a small leather suitcase that held her few belongings. 2 simple dresses, a worn copy of Pride and Prejudice, a locket with her mother's portrait, and a letter from her friend Clarissa. Read so many times the edges of the paper were beginning to fray. Her father did not come to say goodbye. Lord Ashford's black carriage waited at the foot of the steps, gleaming with dew. A footman opened the door without a word. Inside, the Earl awaited, wrapped in a thick wool coat, his gaze lost out the window. He didn't bother to greet her. Vivian climbed in without assistance, closed the door behind her, and took the seat opposite him. For a moment, only the sound of horses and the creak of wheels over the mud filled the space. I thought you'd run away in the night, Ashford said, without looking at her. And leave the debt unpaid? Vivian replied calmly. I'm afraid I have more honor than you do. Ashford slowly turned his face toward her. His eyes, gray as the sky outside, studied her with a mix of surprise and amusement. You're not what I expected. I could say the same about you, she replied, smoothing the folds of her skirt. And what did you expect? An ogre? A villain from a cheap novel? I expected a man honorable enough to refuse payment in the form of a woman. But perhaps I was asking too much. Ashford laughed. It wasn't a joyful laugh, but dry, as if he hadn't truly laughed in a long time. You should be grateful, he said at last. Others would have demanded far more. I only want you to teach manners to a young girl. I won't touch you. I won't humiliate you. And I won't ask you to smile unless you want to. How generous of you, she murmured, her voice edged with irony. Ashford turned back to the window, as if the conversation were nothing but a minor amusement. I've known many women, Miss Aldridge. None have lingered long in my memory. I don't believe you'll be the exception. Vivian didn't reply. Inside, the humiliation burned like a slow fire. But she wouldn't let him see it. She turned her eyes to the horizon, where the first houses of the city began to emerge from the mist. What is your sister's name? She asked, her tone practical. Evelyn. She's 16. Gentle, quiet, and far too kind for this world. My mother wants to launch her into society this season. I won't allow it until she knows how to protect herself among vipers. And I'm to teach her that? You're not noble, but you know how to move like one. You've learned by watching. That can be worth more than any title. Vivian held his gaze for a moment. In his words, she could almost detect a flicker of respect. He offered no apology, no softening of tone. But he didn't entirely despise her. I'll do what I can, she said at last. For Evelyn. Not for you. Ashford inclined his head. As you wish. The rest of the journey passed in silence. When the carriage stopped in front of the gates of Blackthorne Hall, Vivian's heart gave a jolt. The mansion was imposing. Built in grey stone. Surrounded by symmetrical gardens. With towers rising like sentinels. 2 rows of servants waited on the steps of the entrance. Everything about the place spoke of power and of secrets. Vivian stepped down without help. The wind swirled her hair, and her dress fluttered like a flag of surrender. But she didn't bow, didn't hesitate, and didn't allow her posture to betray her fear. Lord Ashford descended behind her and offered his arm. For a moment, she hesitated. Then she took it, without looking at his face. Welcome to your new life, he murmured. And together, they crossed the threshold of a house that wasn't hers, but would become the stage where Vivian would come to understand the price of love, of pride, and of freedom. Chapter 3. Blackthorne Manor. Blackthorne Hall smelled of freshly polished marble, beeswax, and restrained silence. Portraits of former earls and countesses hung from the tall walls, watching all who entered their domain with stern eyes. Vivian felt the weight of generations settle on her shoulders from the very first moment. A butler with an angular face and precise steps led them through the foyer to a high-ceilinged room, where the fire burned modestly. There was no warmth in that house, only restrained beauty, flawless symmetry, and distance. My mother will be here shortly, announced Lord Ashford. In the meantime, I'll introduce you to Evelyn. There was no time for more. The double doors opened with a soft creak, and a slender figure entered the room. She was a young girl with dark hair and an oval face, around 16 years old, with a gentle expression and a closed book in her hands. Ashford, she greeted with a timid smile. Evelyn, he replied, approaching her. This is Vivian Aldridge. Starting today, she'll be your companion and guide for the coming months. Evelyn widened her eyes in surprise, but asked no questions. Her manners were as soft as her voice. It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Aldridge, she said, offering a slight curtsy. Vivian returned the gesture. The pleasure is mine, milady. No need for formalities, Evelyn murmured. Not between us. Vivian smiled for the first time since arriving at the house. It was a faint, but genuine smile. Evelyn had something fragile, as if everything around her might shatter if not handled carefully. I'm glad you say that, Vivian replied. It will be easier to learn if we speak openly. And firmly, interrupted a female voice from the doorway. Both turned around. Standing at the threshold was Lady Violet Blackthorne, mother of the Earl. Tall, thin, dressed in purple velvet and old pearls. She looked as though she had been carved from marble. Her face, still beautiful despite the passing years, had been hardened by constant judgment. Her eyes were not like her son's. In hers, there was no trace of doubt, only authority. Mother, said Ashford, bowing slightly. "Allow me to introduce Miss Aldridge. The young woman you've brought, in place of a proper governess," Lady Violet responded, making no effort to hide the disdain in her voice. Vivian held her head high. "It is an honor to meet you, Lady Blackthorne." Lady Violet circled around her, inspecting her as though she were an antique ornament that had come into fashion for no apparent reason. "She has bearing," she finally said. "But bearing is not bought, nor inherited. It is cultivated through generations." "Who was your mother?" "The youngest daughter of Viscount d'Ambert," Vivian replied. "She married for love, not for convenience." "How romantic," the Countess replied dryly. "Let's hope you haven't also inherited her naivety." Ashford stepped in, cutting the conversation with a single gesture of his hand. "Vivian is not here to be interrogated, Mother. She's the only one I'll allow near Evelyn this season. The matter is settled." Lady Violet raised an eyebrow but said nothing. In her world, words were weapons, and this duel had been lost. For now. A footman approached and announced, "The young ladies of the Montrose family have arrived." "My lord." Vivian noticed Evelyn's face tense slightly, and Lady Violet's lips curve with a hint of satisfaction. Ashford sighed. "Prepare yourself," he murmured to Vivian before leaving the room. "You're about to meet the most well-mannered vipers in London." Minutes later, two young ladies entered the room, wrapped in silk and perfumed with the arrogance of those who have never been contradicted. The elder, Lady Georgiana Montrose, was impeccably beautiful. Almond-shaped eyes, perfectly styled blonde hair, a trained smile. She walked as if each step belonged to the room. Her younger sister, Charlotte, was more cheerful, but with a sharp gaze. "Lord Ashford," said Georgiana in a velvety voice. "What a lovely surprise to find you home so early." "My mother warned me you would be coming," he replied flatly. Georgiana turned toward Vivian with a barely noticeable smile. "And this creature? A distant cousin? A new exotic acquisition?" Vivian didn't flinch. "I am Vivian Aldridge." "A pleasure." "Aldridge, isn't that the name of the gentleman who lost an estate in Devon a few years ago?" Ashford crossed his arms. "And also the name of the woman who, if anyone else dares to imply anything inappropriate, will receive direct instructions from me to be excluded from every event this season." Georgiana paled, but only for an instant. "How gallant," she said, lowering her gaze. "It will be a pleasure to get to know you better, Miss Aldridge. I'm sure you have many fascinating stories." The Montroses withdrew with sharp smiles. When the door closed again, Evelyn approached Vivian and took her hand. "Don't pay attention to them," she whispered. "They're like mirrors. They only reflect what they want to see." Vivian squeezed her hand in gratitude. That girl was wiser than she appeared. And though the day was just beginning, Vivian already sensed that the real duels in Blackthorne Manor would not be fought with swords, but with words and glances. Chapter 4. Ball at the Montrose Estate. The Montrose Grand Ballroom shimmered under the light of hundreds of chandeliers. The high ceilings, adorned with mythological frescoes, echoed with the sound of violins and the constant murmur of the guests. The ladies wore silk dresses in pastel tones, with white gloves that barely brushed against the gloved hands of the gentlemen. The social season had officially begun. Vivian stood beside Lady Evelyn near the piano, where unpresented young ladies customarily waited. She wore a light blue gown, simple, yet elegantly cut, and her hair was gathered into a low bun held in place by delicate pearl pins. She wore no jewels, no flashy accessories. And yet, she did not go unnoticed. The gazes of the other ladies were not admiring, but scrutinizing, judging. Lady Georgiana, dressed in emerald green lace, slid her fan with feigned indifference while whispering with other debutantes. Vivian couldn't hear the words, but the glint in their eyes and the barely contained smiles made their intentions clear. "You shouldn't worry," Evelyn murmured, sensing her companion's discomfort. They talk about everyone. Even me. And I'm legitimate. What bothers me isn't that they talk, Vivian replied serenely. It's that they do it so poorly. Evelyn let out a soft, sincere laugh. The first dances began. Gentlemen moved among groups of young ladies, selecting partners with the same lightness used to pick a flower from the garden. No one approached Vivian. No one. Except the furtive stares of the guests, curious about this young woman who was neither lady nor servant. Too close to the Earl to be ignored. Yet too far to be acknowledged. Aren't you dancing tonight, Miss Aldridge? A voice said behind her. Vivian turned. A young man with a friendly, if slightly awkward, air offered his hand politely. It was Viscount Denham, a distant cousin of Lady Montrose. I appreciate the offer, my lord. But I'm here tonight merely as Lady Evelyn's companion. Denham looked confused, but withdrew politely. A few steps away, Vivian saw Georgiana call him immediately and whisper something in his ear. He nodded, nervously, then walked off. The humiliation was subtle but effective. Vivian felt the sting of wounded pride in her chest. Not because of the rejection, but because of the clear strategy. They had made her the target of scandal before it even had a chance to exist. And then, it happened. The notes of a new country dance began. The crowd parted slightly, as if guided by something invisible. And among the guests appeared Lord Ashford Blackthorne, immaculately dressed in black and ivory, with an unreadable expression on his face. He stopped in front of Vivian. Would you dance this piece with me? Silence settled over the room. The ladies stopped fanning themselves. The gentlemen ceased their chatter. Lady Georgiana narrowed her eyes. Evelyn held her breath. Vivian looked at him coolly. Do you truly think it proper, my lord, to offer me a dance, given my position? Ashford tilted his head slightly, amused. That is exactly why I offer it. To remind you that your worth isn't in what others see, but in what you choose to show. Vivian held his gaze for several seconds. Then, without another word, she placed her hand in his. The ballroom seemed to breathe again as they stepped toward the center. The couples shifted, and the music resumed. They danced with precision. Every movement calculated. Every step measured. But beneath it all, something more dangerous than scandal simmered. Contained tension. Ashford said nothing. Vivian didn't look away. Each turn was a confrontation. Each brush of their hands, a challenge. When the dance ended, murmurs spread once more across the room like ignited gunpowder. He escorted her back to her place, never breaking eye contact. Now they will have all seen you, he murmured. And now they will all criticize you, she replied in a low voice. I've been criticized for worse. Vivian felt the heat rise to her cheeks. She didn't know if it was embarrassment, anger, or something far more dangerous. Ashford bowed slightly. Tonight, my dear, debt repaid, you won. And he walked away, leaving behind a whirlwind of stares, whispers, and the certainty that, for the first time in a very long time, he had done something he couldn't explain even to himself. Chapter 5, A Stolen Kiss. The morning after the Montrose ball arrived heavy with rumor. The sun had barely peeked through the curtains of the breakfast room when maids were already whispering in the corridors. Gardeners exchanged knowing glances, and even the butler seemed to be holding back an opinion. Vivian remained in her rooms for as long as possible, pretending to read a book she couldn't concentrate on. Sitting by the window with her gaze fixed on the garden, she could still feel the weight of Lord Ashford's hand in hers. The measured rhythm of the country dance. And that look that left no room for doubt. There had been something more than courtesy in his gestures. But that something wasn't supposed to exist. It couldn't exist. Evelyn burst into the room without warning. Her hair loose. No gloves. No decorum, like a girl still fleeing her governesses. Mother is furious. She says your dance was a deliberate provocation. That Lord Ashford only did it to challenge her. Vivian raised an eyebrow. And what do you think? Evelyn flopped down onto the divan. I think she hasn't stopped talking about you since last night. Which, coming from my mother, is the equivalent of a war medal. Vivian, do you feel something for him? Vivian looked down. Uncomfortable. I don't have the privilege of feelings. Evelyn. I'm just repaying a debt. That's what you say with your lips, Evelyn replied. But last night, when you danced, it was like watching two chess pieces that no one of them will surrender. Even if they don't yet know which one. The silence that followed was thick. Evelyn's words, so precise, hurt more than Vivian wanted to admit. Hours later, while trying to distract herself with a walk through the back gardens, Vivian came face to face with Lord Ashford. He had no escort, no cane, as he usually did. Just his grey jacket, unbuttoned, and an expression that failed to conceal the fatigue of a sleepless night. Are you avoiding me, Miss Aldridge? He asked bluntly. Only the scandal, my lord. Though it seems to follow me even among the roses. He smiled slowly. Not the polite, practiced smile he wore in society, but something more private, less rehearsed. Last night, everyone looked at you, and for a moment, they wondered if you might be worth more than a countess. And what do you think? Ashford studied her for a few seconds in silence. Then, stepping closer, he spoke in a low voice. I think the most valuable jewels aren't always in display cases. Some are hidden in locked boxes. Forgotten. Waiting for someone to recognize them. Vivian turned her face away. Annoyed. Comparing me to an object does not flatter me. I'm not, he said. Stepping closer still. I'm comparing you to a secret. One that everyone wants to uncover. But only one will have the right to keep. She tried to step back but stumbled slightly on the edge of the stone path. Ashford immediately reached out, catching her by the waist. It was a brief gesture, but far too intimate. My lord. Just a moment, he whispered. And without further warning, he kissed her. It was not a clumsy kiss, nor a passionate one. It was firm, delicate, a restrained gesture, born not of sudden desire, but of the weight of too many unspoken words. Vivian didn't pull away at first, but when she did react, she stepped back abruptly, her face flushed with fury and shame. You have no right. I know, he said, offering no excuse. This is not a game. I am not a trophy among your conquests. You're not. Then don't treat me like one. Her voice trembled at the end. Not from weakness, but from the intensity of everything she was holding back. Ashford lowered his gaze, as if for the first time. He truly understood the damage he had done. I'm sorry. Vivian turned without replying and walked away through the garden, knowing that from that moment on, nothing would ever be the same. From one of the windows, Evelyn had seen it all. Not with surprise, but with concern. In her eyes, there was no judgment, but something far more complex. The sense that this kiss was not the beginning of a romance, but of the true conflict. Chapter 6. Tea at Montrose House. The carriage came to a halt in front of the Montrose residence. An elegant mansion with a symmetrical facade, framed by perfectly pruned rosebushes and gleaming windows. Afternoon tea was one of those social customs where words mattered less than the intentions behind them, and that afternoon was laced with carefully perfumed venom. Vivian stepped down from the carriage with the composure of someone well aware she was crossing a line drawn by others. Lady Violet, serene in expression and sharp in gaze, had handed her the invitation in person that very morning. It will be useful for you to observe how true ladies behave, she had said. Even if you don't belong to their world, it's wise to understand their codes. She was accompanied by Lady Evelyn, thrilled by her first proper social outing, and Lady Clarissa Fane, who had insisted on attending, out of sheer curiosity and protective instinct, she had said with irony. They were received by Lady Georgiana Montrose, immaculately dressed in sky blue, with her sister Charlotte beside her. Both offered measured greetings, but their smiles never reached their eyes. What a delightful surprise, Georgiana said upon seeing Vivian. I didn't know governesses received personal invitations. Oh, it's not customary, Lady Violet replied with an icy smile. But every lady must learn to move among snakes. Clarissa raised an eyebrow, weighing whether it was worth delivering a sharp retort. Vivian, however, simply bowed her head slightly and offered thanks in a soft voice. The room was spacious, decorated with floral tapestries and the finest porcelain teacups. The tea began with superficial chatter, veiled questions, and laughter that never reached the soul. Vivian remained mostly silent, aware of every glance, every word carefully chosen to wound. And what do you teach, Miss Aldridge? Charlotte asked in a sing-song tone. Reading, embroidery, or how to survive without a surname. The comment drew a few restrained chuckles from some of the ladies. She teaches dignity, Lady Clarissa said, setting her teacup down on its saucer with a soft clink. A virtue increasingly rare these days. A new silence settled over the room. Georgiana straightened slightly, as if savoring the tension. Clarissa, dearest. Always the romantic. No, my lady, Clarissa replied firmly. Merely fair. Vivian didn't know whether to thank her or worry for her. But one thing was clear. The conversation was over. At least for her. After tea, as the ladies dispersed into small groups to chat or admire the flowers, Georgiana approached Lady Violet with a glass in hand. You have admirable restraint, madam. Allowing your son to treat a woman like her with courtesy. It's more than I would tolerate. I don't tolerate her, Lady Violet replied bluntly. I observe her, as one does with any anomaly that enters a closed ecosystem. From the terrace, Vivian saw both women glance her way at the same time. The air grew heavy once more. Evelyn approached her, uneasy. Are you all right? Never better, Vivian lied, with a controlled smile. Don't let them wound you, Evelyn whispered. Some people wear elegance as a mask for poison. Vivian looked at her warmly. And others, like you, carry it in their hearts. They left early. On the way back to Blackthorne Hall, Vivian realized for the first time that the game she had been dragged into was not merely about debts or appearances. It was an invisible battlefield, where surviving wasn't enough, one had to endure, to learn, and when the moment came, to respond with the same precision used to serve tea, or drive in a social dagger. Chapter 7. Lessons in Warfare. Breakfast at Blackthorne Hall was served in a silence so tense that even the sound of a knife slicing bread seemed offensive. Lady Violet read the newspaper with a serene expression, as though she hadn't been the architect of the previous day's humiliation. Evelyn stirred her tea absent-mindedly, and Lord Ashford had yet to make an appearance. Vivian ate with measured composure, neither hurried nor hesitant, each sip of coffee a quiet act of defiance. I trust the gathering at the Montrose residence proved educational, Lady Violet finally said, without looking up from the paper. Very much so, my lady, Vivian replied. I now understand that speaking properly is not enough. One must also learn how to smile while being attacked. Lady Violet narrowed her eyes, but said nothing. Evelyn looked at Vivian with a mixture of fear and pride. Could we continue with our Latin lessons today, Vivian? The young lady interjected. We were about to begin Ovid. Gladly, Vivian replied with a slight nod. After breakfast, Vivian took refuge in the library. Not just because Evelyn awaited her there, but because that dim, book-lined sanctuary was the only place where she could breathe without feeling the weight of 100 judging eyes. Are you truly all right? Evelyn asked, setting the dictionary aside. Yesterday, you were very brave. Vivian closed the volume in her hands. It's not bravery one needs here, Evelyn. It's strategy. Strategy? You read poetry. But this isn't a poem. It's a chessboard. Your mother, Lady Montrose. All of them, they move with precision. Every word, every gesture is designed to diminish me. And I don't have the luxury of pretending I don't notice. Evelyn was silent. Then, in a softer voice, she murmured, "You could leave." Vivian smiled. Sadly. "No. Not after everything I've lost. If I leave, the story will be of a governess who thought too highly of herself and was put in her place. But if I stay and learn to play their game, then it becomes a different story." At that moment, Clarissa entered unannounced, as was now her custom. "I was beginning to worry," she said. "The last time someone publicly offended Georgiana, they ended up in Scotland. Exiled? Married. Which, to her, is the same thing," she replied dryly. She sat beside Vivian, examining her with a critical eye. "You can't survive with books alone, Vivian. Not here. Latin quotes won't be enough. And what do you suggest?" "First, posture. Always upright. Second, if you're going to speak, let every word be a dagger wrapped in silk. Third, you need allies. Influence. And of course, a new dress." Vivian laughed. "Despite everything. A dress? One that makes Lady Violet fight to keep her frown from showing. That makes Georgiana pale while pretending not to be jealous. That makes even your count glance twice." Evelyn blushed at the mention of your count. Vivian shook her head. "I don't need to be looked at." "Of course you do," Clarissa said calmly. "You need to be seen. Remembered. You need them to know you're here and that you cannot be erased so easily." For the first time in days, Vivian felt something beyond tension or fear. It ran deeper. It was purpose. "And you'll teach me?" she asked. Clarissa smiled like someone accepting a challenge. "I'll teach you everything I know. But promise me one thing." "What is it?" "That when the time comes, you won't forgive so easily." Vivian didn't answer right away. But inside her, a new resolve was taking shape. From now on, she would stop walking on eggshells. The game had begun, and she was ready to learn every one of its rules. Chapter 8, The Masquerade Ball. Carriages arrived one after another at Montrose Palace, leaving behind echoes of hooves, silk, and perfume. The night air, cool yet gentle, was thick with anticipation. From afar, the glow of chandeliers spilled through the windows like a spell, promising music, intrigue, and masks behind which nothing was what it seemed. Vivian stepped down slowly from the Blackthorne carriage. Her gown, midnight blue satin trimmed with ivory lace, fell to the floor with effortless grace. White silk gloves reached to her elbows, and the bodice, carefully tailored to avoid scandal, revealed just enough by the strict standards of the season. A black lace mask, fitted over her eyes, made her feel both invisible and powerful. Beside her, Evelyn looked like a jewel wrapped in silver tulle. The youngest Blackthorne, not yet formally presented to society, had been allowed to attend only as a spectator, not as a debutante. Even so, she radiated innocent excitement that stood in stark contrast to the rigidity of the environment. "Remember, tonight you only observe," Vivian whispered as they crossed the marble vestibule. "But observe everything," Evelyn replied with a conspiratorial smile. Inside, the music floated like a golden river. Guests danced among columns draped in ribbons and night-blooming flowers, each one hidden behind a mask that blurred class, reputation, and resentment. Vivian stayed close to one of the walls through the first few songs. She knew it was safer that way, even where masks pretended to offer equality. The glances still spoke with brutal clarity. "That's Vivian Aldridge, isn't it?" murmured a lady as she passed. "They say she teaches Latin to the Count's sister, and other things to him." "The governess? Here? How bold," whispered another. Vivian pretended not to hear, but each word was another thorn. Then, a figure in a perfectly tailored black suit approached through the crowd. She didn't need to see his face to recognize him. His posture, his stride, the way the rest of the room parted for him, it was enough. "Miss Aldridge," he said, bowing flawlessly, "would you grant me this dance?" Vivian hesitated. Don't you think we're already stirring enough gossip with just one appearance? Then let it be worth it. And before she could answer, Lord Ashford extended his hand. Steady and unyielding. The orchestra shifted to a slower melody. A masquerade dance. A choreography in which every movement must appear effortless. Every brush of skin accidental. You haven't replied to my letters, he murmured as they turned to the rhythm. I had nothing to say to you, she replied quietly, not meeting his eyes. Not even to reproach me? You're not worth the effort, she said, her lips barely curved in a smile. Ashford held her waist with just enough pressure. It wasn't desire that moved him. It was wounded pride. Contained fascination. Something deeper. When you dance, the whole room seems to disappear, he finally said. Perhaps because you wish it would, whispered Vivian. Isn't that how you deal with things you can't control? A pause. You confuse me, Vivian. That's not my problem, my lord. From the upper gallery, Lady Violet watched them, lips pressed into a tight line. Beside her, Lady Georgiana Montrose smiled with cynicism beneath her golden mask. My mother thinks you're dragging me into scandal, Ashford said. And you believe you're falling by choice, Vivian answered, looking away. The dance ended. They parted with a subtle bow. No goodbyes. But as Vivian walked away, she felt her pulse quicken and an invisible weight settle on her chest. Because she knew that tonight, in a ballroom full of masks, the most dangerous thing was what couldn't be hidden. What they felt. Chapter 9. The Enemy's Gift. The days following the masquerade were tinged with lingering rumors. Like a perfume that refused to fade. In drawing rooms, along garden paths, even among the servants, the name Vivian Aldridge began to circulate more often than was appropriate for a governess. They say the Earl has made her his protégée. Protégée, or something more? The Montrose ladies won't invite her again. That says everything. Vivian, as was her habit, didn't respond. She neither denied nor confirmed anything. She simply carried on with her routine. Evelyn's lessons, brief conversations with Clarissa, and solitary walks through the gardens when the weather allowed. But then the package arrived. It was wrapped in ivory paper, tied with a blue ribbon. It bore no sender's name, but the footman who delivered it claimed it came directly from the Earl. Vivian opened it cautiously. Inside, wrapped in silk, was an old book, a limited edition of Ovid, adorned with golden engravings and illustrated margins. Tucked inside, a short note, for the woman who teaches others to see the world with new eyes. Gee. Vivian closed it immediately. She said nothing, raised no voice, tore no paper. But her breathing slowed, grew tense. She couldn't accept such a gesture. Not after everything that had happened. A gift? Clarissa repeated hours later, scandalized. A book of mythological love? Is he trying to seduce you with Latin poetry? He's trying to make me a target, Vivian replied. His intentions are irrelevant. What matters is how it looks to others. And what do you think? Vivian didn't answer. Clarissa set her teacup aside. You should return it. I already did, Vivian said, raising a brow. In person. Without words. Just a look. That same afternoon, Lady Violet stormed into the library. She didn't knock. She didn't greet. She simply entered as though she owned every corner of the estate. Vivian stood at once. My lady. Lady Violet held the book in her hands. Does this belong to you? Vivian swallowed. It was sent to me. Unasked for. And returned. The Countess added, opening the volume with disdain. How curious. Women in your position usually treasure even crumbs of attention. I am not one of those women, Vivian said calmly. Lady Violet studied her for a long moment. My son doesn't understand what's at stake. But I do. The Blackthorne name will not be tied to ruin. And you are ruin with an educated face. Then rest easy, said Vivian, not raising her voice. I have never intended to take anything that was not offered honestly. The Countess closed the book and held it out to her. Keep it. Not for him, but as a reminder. The hardest lessons are not learned through words, but through consequences. Vivian accepted it only because there was no alternative. But that night, alone in her room, she threw the book into the fire without a second thought. The flames lit her eyes, though no tears came. Not because it didn't hurt, but because she had already decided that, if she was to burn in this world, she would do so standing. From the hallway, Evelyn watched in secret. And for the first time, she understood that war wasn't just waged in ballrooms, it was in the silences too. Chapter 10. The Limits of Obedience. The atmosphere at Blackthorne Hall shifted without a single cloud in the sky. It didn't rain. There were no storms. And yet, it felt like a tempest. The servants avoided speaking to Vivian. Conversations in the corridors would fall silent when she passed. Evelyn, by her mother's express command, was now only allowed to study with her governess during essential hours. Clarissa had departed for Bath with her aunt, and the silence left behind was heavier than ever. Vivian didn't ask questions. She didn't complain. But each hour without access to Evelyn, to the library, or a single word from the Earl, was a quiet blow that began to leave bruises. On the fourth day after the book incident, Lady Violet summoned her to her private sitting room. "Miss Aldridge, you fulfilled your purpose," she said without preamble, seated by the fire as if delivering a sentence. "Evelyn has made progress. The scandal has been contained. And my patience has reached its limit." Vivian watched her silently. "Do you wish me to resign, my lady?" "No. I wish you to leave. This week. I've arranged a letter of recommendation. Discreet, but sufficient for someone of your station." Vivian held back the tremor in her hands. "Has Lord Ashford been informed?" "It's none of his concern." "It is," she replied, with dangerous calm. "Because he was the one who brought me here. And you were the one who chose to tolerate me, while it suited you." Lady Violet rose to her feet. "Do not mistake survival for merit. You remained here out of courtesy. That courtesy has ended." At that moment, the door burst open. Lord Ashford stood in the doorway. He wasn't wearing his usual coat. His boots were caked in mud. His tousled hair suggested a recent ride. But most striking was his face, cold, yet blazing. "What's going on here?" Lady Violet didn't flinch. "I'm organizing this household, as I always have. This young woman is no longer needed." He strode into the room. "Evelyn needs her. And I never authorized her dismissal. Since when does a mother need permission to clean up the mess her son makes?" Ashford turned to Vivian. "Do you wish to leave?" Vivian swallowed hard. "No. But I also can't stay where I'm not wanted." "Then stay," he said firmly. "Because I want you here." Lady Violet looked at him as if he had just declared war on the crown. "Then take responsibility for the consequences." He nodded. But he didn't turn to his mother. He kept his gaze on Vivian. "As of today, Evelyn will resume her lessons in the East Wing. You will have everything you need there. And you, Miss Aldridge, will answer only to me." Vivian said nothing. Every word he spoke was both a victory and a sentence. When Lady Violet left the room without another glance, the Earl stepped closer. "Are you all right?" Vivian took a step back. "Don't protect me out of pride, my lord." "I'm not." "Then tell me why." Ashford lowered his gaze. For the first time, he had no immediate reply. No honest one. "Because you matter to me. Even if I don't know what to do with that." Vivian pressed her lips together. "Then I suggest you learn quickly. Because if you don't understand what you feel, you won't know how to keep from destroying it." And without waiting for an answer, she left him alone, with his mother enraged, his sister isolated, and a truth that had begun to burn inside him. Chapter 11. The Crack in the Ice. The news that Vivian Aldridge would remain at Blackthorne Hall spread with the speed of fire on rice paper. Invitations to Lady Violet began to dwindle. Some ladies avoided her tea salon altogether. One countess even left a gathering mid-evening upon realizing the governess was in the same room. Lady Violet, who never showed weakness, greeted each slight with polite smiles, but began to scheme in silence. Vivian, for her part, did not seek the spotlight. She didn't boast about her continued presence nor change her behavior. She resumed teaching Evelyn, strolled the gardens with discretion, and conversed with Clarissa, who had returned from Bath with renewed enthusiasm in scandalously modern dresses. But something had changed. She was no longer invisible. Now, people watched her with caution, with curiosity, and with resentment. One afternoon, while reviewing a translation of Virgil with Evelyn, she received an invitation that left her breathless. Baroness Delacourt had requested her presence as a personal guest at a classical music recital to be held at her winter residence. "This is extraordinary," murmured Clarissa, reading the note with disbelief. "Do you realize what it means for a baroness to invite you outside the Blackthorne circle?" Vivian did. It was recognition. A crack in the walls of aristocracy. Small, but real. And Lady Violet understood it, too. "You will not go," she said in a glacial tone. "It would be a direct insult to our family for a governess to present herself publicly, as if she were an equal." Vivian faced her with a calm voice. "The Baroness invited me as a person, not as an employee. And do you imagine the consequences?" "Yes. But I also know I've done nothing to deserve the scorn already being shown to me." That night, Lord Ashford summoned Vivian to his study. There was no protocol, no servants, just a single lit lamp, disordered papers, and a half-empty glass of brandy. "Are you going to the recital?" he asked. "I haven't decided yet." "Are you forbidding it?" He shook his head. "I have no right to. Nor do I wish to." Vivian took a deep breath. "Then why did you summon me?" Ashford approached the window. He seemed uneasy, as if everything he felt was stuck in his throat and couldn't find its way out. "I'm starting to fear for you." "Why now?" "Because I can no longer protect you without dragging you down with me." Vivian stepped closer. "Steady. I don't want your protection. I just want you to decide, once and for all, if you'll respect me, or hide me." The words fell like a hammer between them. Ashford lowered his gaze. "It's never been just a debt, Vivian." She nodded, voice trembling but firm. "And I've never been just a mistake." She left without waiting for another word, because she knew there would be none that night. What neither of them knew yet, was that the crack that had just opened between them was not just of pride or desire. It was a real wound. And wounds, when left untreated, bleed. Chapter 12. The Misplaced Letter. The morning was grey, nearly motionless, as if even the wind hesitated to stir at Blackthorne Hall. Vivian was in the library, reorganizing the poetry volumes she and Evelyn had used during the week. She had just finished writing a letter to Lady Clarissa Fane, a reply to her latest missive. Filled with biting remarks about the recital Vivian still hadn't decided whether to attend. The letter said nothing about Lord Ashford, or so Vivian believed. But it spoke of everything else. Of loneliness. Of the price of preserving one's dignity. Of how a woman who doesn't belong might still be heard, if she speaks with a calm voice and steady gaze. Vivian left it atop the reading desk, between two books. Upon seeing it, Evelyn asked, "Will you take it to the post yourself?" "As soon as I finish sorting these last volumes," she replied with a soft smile. But when she returned to the desk, the letter was gone. Hours later, news spread through the house like a lit fuse. A letter signed by Vivian Aldridge had been read aloud during a gathering at Lady Hargrave's estate. Not by her. Not by Clarissa. But by Lady Georgiana Montrose, who claimed to have received it by mistake, already opened. The excerpts were repeated with morbid delight across town. "I have learned that sometimes one survives not by belonging, but by knowing when to stay silent. Though I confess that Lord Ashford looks at me as if he knows he cannot silence me completely. There are days when I feel I'm walking a tightrope, stretched between education and contempt. And most repeated of all, a part of me, Clarissa, still believes that all this is merely an illusion upheld by masks. That the Earl will protect me until I become inconvenient. It was an ambush, Clarissa exclaimed, outraged when she heard what had happened. That letter was meant for me alone. Vivian, on the other hand, said nothing. What will you do? Evelyn asked, worried. Nothing, she replied. Because if I try to defend myself, I'll give them what they want. More voice, more drama, more reason to erase me. But you can't stay silent. Yes, I can. And I must. Because now they're not attacking me for what I did, but for who I am. And that can't be fixed with explanations. Lord Ashford appeared at dusk. He entered the library unannounced, closed the door, looked at her for several seconds without speaking. Is it yours? Vivian nodded. Is it all true? Does it matter? Ashford studied her intently. Yes. Because if it is, if you've written that you believe I'll stop protecting you the moment it's no longer convenient for me, then you've hurt me more than any of those women ever could. Vivian didn't lower her gaze. I didn't write it as an accusation. I wrote it as a warning. To myself. He took a step toward her. And now? Now I know that my silence protects me no more than my voice. Ashford drew a long breath but said nothing more. He simply looked at her with a new expression. Disappointment, and something close to fear. If my mother insists you must leave, this time I won't be able to stop her without consequences that could endanger far more than your position, he finally admitted. Vivian met his eyes. Pain carefully held back. Then let silence speak. Because I refuse to beg for a place I've earned with every word I didn't say. And she left him there, standing alone, among books that could no longer comfort him, and a truth they could no longer hide. Chapter 13. The Corner of Farewell. The suitcases lay open on the bed. Vivian hadn't packed them. The maids had. Under direct and final orders from Lady Violet Blackthorne, who had given her instructions that very morning. Your time in this house has come to an end, the Countess said, without raising her voice. Not because of the letter, but because of what you represent. You have cast doubt upon the dignity of the Blackthorne name. And that will not be tolerated. Vivian didn't argue. She knew that any word she said would only be used against her. She simply nodded with a slight curtsy and ascended to her room. Face calm, hands cold. But inside, she burned. It was Evelyn who burst into the room shortly after. Her face flushed, eyes wet, and breath uneven. You can't leave, she said, nearly shouting. You can't leave me alone with her. Vivian stepped forward and took her hands. It's not my choice, Evelyn. Of course it is. You're not a prisoner. No. Just a debt that's been paid. A nuisance they can no longer justify. Don't say that. The girl was trembling. You're my only guide, my only friend, and the only person who's ever had the courage to look my mother in the eye without lowering your head. That's why I must go, Vivian answered softly. Because sometimes telling the truth comes at a cost. Evelyn stepped back. And for the first time, her voice grew firm. Then I will pay it too. Without waiting for a reply, she ran out of the room. Vivian found her in the music room, standing tall before her mother. Her cheeks still damp but her chin lifted high. If she leaves, said Evelyn, pointing to the doorway with an outstretched arm, I won't attend a single event. I won't debut this season or the next. I won't speak to anyone. I won't accept a single invitation. I'll become invisible. Lady Violet looked at her daughter as though she didn't recognize her. Are you defying me? I'm choosing what's right. The Countess stepped forward. All this for a governess? For the only person who has treated me like my voice meant something. Evelyn replied without hesitation. You raised me to obey. She taught me to think. The silence that followed was harsher than a scream. Lady Violet stepped back slightly, as though she'd been struck. This will not be the end of it, she said at last, before turning and leaving the room with her wounded dignity intact. Vivian didn't know what to say. Evelyn walked toward her, her eyes filled with determination. You're staying, she whispered. Not for me. For you. Because if you leave now, it will be as if you never existed. And I won't allow that. Vivian embraced the girl tightly, for the first time. Without words. There was no triumph in that moment. But there was something more powerful. Loyalty. And true love. From the hallway, Lord Ashford had heard everything. He didn't intervene. He didn't step forward. He simply stood still. Eyes closed. Fists clenched. As if fighting something within himself. Because what he had seen in his sister, and in Vivian, was what he feared most. A truth he could not control. And a love he could no longer deny. Chapter 14. Snow in the garden. The last snowfall of the year arrived without warning. Silent as a truce. The garden of Blackthorne Hall, where weeks ago secrets and confessions had bloomed, now stretched beneath a white mantle. Still and pure. But Vivian knew that the peace it suggested was as false as the calm within the house. That afternoon, Evelyn had been sent to try on her debut gown. Lady Violet, more controlling than ever, oversaw every hem, every stitch, every thread of lace. The grand event was to take place in 4 weeks, at the end of the spring season. As befitted a young lady of her standing, expectations were high, and judgment inevitable. Vivian had escaped to the garden, wrapped in a dark coat, gloves, and thick boots. She walked slowly, letting her steps carve a path across the snow. Were you planning to leave without saying goodbye this time? Said a voice behind her. She didn't need to turn. She knew who it was. I thought it fair that this time I be the one to walk away first. Lord Ashford stopped a few steps away. He wore his usual coat, more formal than necessary, as if unable to shed the armor his title required of him. Evelyn told me what she did, he said. I didn't know she had so much fire in her. No one's ever allowed her to, Vivian replied. But it runs in her blood. And that makes her dangerous to her mother. Ashford nodded. And you? Do you consider yourself dangerous? No more than the truth, she said, without looking at him. There was a moment of silence, the kind that doesn't come from awkwardness, but from restraint. I've been a coward, Vivian, he said finally. She turned to face him. And what do you intend to do now with your cowardice? Ashford looked at her as if unsure whether to step closer, or protect her from himself. Realize that I'm tired of pretending I feel nothing when you're near. Vivian lowered her gaze. The problem isn't what you feel, Gabriel. It's what you'll do when you have to choose between protecting your name, or me. He stepped forward. I don't want you to leave. Then say it in front of everyone. I can't. Then I will. Her words were both ice and fire. But they weren't bitter, they were true. He stepped closer again. Now only an arm's length away. Vivian, don't kiss me. Ashford looked at her, confused. Why not? Because if you do, I won't be able to hate you as easily as I need to when the time comes for me to leave. He gave a sad smile. What if I don't want that time to come? Then learn how to stop it. And with a brief curtsy, she left him behind, amid the melting snow and the certainty that time was running out. 4 weeks. That was all that separated them from the day Evelyn would be presented. And nothing would ever be the same again. Chapter 15. The white dress. The dress hung in front of the window like a promise. Soft ivory, embroidered with silver thread, tiny pearls along the neckline, and sheer flowing sleeves. Evelyn gazed at it as if it were an altar. It was beautiful, perfect, and cruel. I don't think I'll be able to breathe in it, she whispered, while Vivian carefully adjusted the bodice. You will, Vivian replied gently. Perhaps not during the evening, but afterwards. I promise. I don't want to do this without you. The young woman murmured. Vivian pretended not to hear. She adjusted a pleat in the skirt. Straightened a ribbon. For weeks. The atmosphere had become suffocating. And yet both pretended there was still time. In the drawing rooms, Lady Violet received two society ladies with polite smiles. They chatted about flowers, vendors, and recent scandals. But as soon as they left, she summoned Vivian. She made her enter alone. Evelyn's dress has arrived. The event is in exactly 3 weeks. I want everything to be flawless. It will be. My lady. I'm not talking about embroidery, said the Countess. I'm talking about presents. Yours. Vivian stood tall. You want me not to attend? I want you to disappear. Completely. Before that day. Vivian didn't blink. I won't. Evelyn needs me. You may loathe me, but you can't deny I've been the only constant in her progress. Lady Violet rose with calculated slowness. Then allow me to offer you an alternative. She walked to the desk and took out an envelope. A job offer. A house in Northumberland. Well recommended. No rumors. No scandals. They'd pay you twice what you earn here. You could leave tomorrow. Vivian took the envelope. She didn't open it. And that way, your world remains intact. No cracks. No witnesses. Exactly. And what will you tell Evelyn? That you chose to leave. Like everyone who doesn't belong. Vivian held her gaze. And for the first time in a long while, Lady Violet looked away. Thank you for your generosity, my lady. But if I leave, it won't be in secret. Later that night, in the empty library, Vivian found Lord Ashford. He saw her from the threshold. He looked like he'd aged 5 years in the past few weeks. My mother spoke to you. Yes. Did she offer you an exit? A very comfortable one. Quiet. Painless. Without you. He didn't move. Will you accept it? Vivian tightened her grip on the envelope. I don't know. I'm struggling to remember why staying is braver than leaving with dignity. Ashford stepped toward her. Because if you leave now, you're surrendering the story. Yours. Mine. Evelyn's. They'll all be rewritten without you. Vivian swallowed hard. I can't keep fighting alone. He nodded. Then don't fight. Just stay. Not for me. For you. For what you've built with your own hands while everyone wanted to see you fall. She didn't answer. She simply placed the envelope, still sealed, on the mantelpiece. Evelyn came downstairs at midnight. Barefoot. Hair loose. Her face troubled. Are you leaving? She asked from the doorway. Vivian shook her head. Not now. Evelyn ran to hug her. Like a child clinging to a dream. And on the hearth, the fire slowly consumed the ashes of an offer that would never be accepted. Chapter 16. The night before, the music room was cloaked in shadows, lit only by the flickering firelight. Evelyn had just retired after a long day of rehearsals, posture drills, and the endless lesson on how to curtsy in a way that concealed nerves but revealed noble blood. Tomorrow, I'll stop being a child, she had said, a mix of fear and excitement in her voice. Vivian hadn't replied. She simply embraced her, knowing Evelyn still didn't understand that her true transformation wouldn't happen in the ballroom, but in how the world responded to her. Later, in the library, Vivian couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, watching the moon reflect over the now green gardens. A sign that winter was finally over. The door opened without warning. Lord Ashford. He wore no coat. No excuses. Shouldn't you be in your room? She asked without turning. And miss the chance to say what I never say? Vivian slowly turned her head. He approached with measured steps. Tomorrow, your duty will be complete. Evelyn will be presented. My mother will consider herself victorious. And you could leave, without anyone daring to stop you. Vivian looked at him. Steady. And you? I don't know how to ask you to stay without sounding selfish. Then don't ask. Just tell me the truth. Ashford held her gaze. Finally, without armor. I love you, Vivian. Even if I don't deserve you. Even if I don't know what to do with it. Even if I've been too slow. Too cowardly. Too proud. Vivian didn't blink. And tomorrow? Tomorrow I'll be standing. Waiting for you at the end of the ballroom, as if every rumor. Every glance. Every whisper didn't matter. Because they won't. If you're there. She lowered her eyes. Her voice came out as barely a breath. If I walk into that room with you. There's no turning back. Ashford stepped closer. Then again. Until he was just a breath away. That's what I hope. Vivian looked up. And for the first time. She stopped holding back. Stopped pretending it didn't hurt. That it didn't matter. That she wasn't afraid. Because she loved him. Had loved him since the first time she hated him. And she kissed him. Not like one kisses a count. Not like one kisses a reformed libertine. She kissed him like a man who had been war, and also home. The next day. Blackthorne Hall would awaken to flowers. Servants rushing. Carriages arriving. And the echo of an event that would define Evelyn's destiny. But that night. In the shadows and whispered truths. Two people chose to stop hiding. And for them. That mattered more than any debut. Aquí tienes la traducción al inglés del capítulo 17. The silent decision. Incluyendo el epílogo con el cierre del libro. Chapter 17. The silent decision. Blackthorne Hall pulsed like an orchestra tuning up. Servants rushed through the hallways. The butler checked every floral arrangement. And the crystal chandeliers gleamed with the precision of freshly cut diamonds. Evelyn's big day had arrived. Vivian dressed her in silence. Evelyn trembled, more from excitement than nerves. Her dress was a masterpiece. White. Pure. Elegant. Designed to make her shine like a star at her social debut. Am I ready? Evelyn asked. A nervous smile on her lips. Vivian looked at her tenderly and held her hands tightly. You've been ready since the day you started speaking with your own voice. Will you be there? When I'm presented. Of course. She said, though she wasn't sure it was true. As the guests arrived one after another. Lord Ashford waited at the top of the grand staircase. He wore formal attire. His posture impeccable. In his inner pocket was a small letter. A promise. He had decided that today would be the day. No more games. No more distance. In front of everyone. He would declare his choice. And if that meant scandal, so be it. Vivian had kissed him. Had looked at him with truth. That was enough for him to risk everything. But he didn't know that. 2 hours earlier. Vivian had been summoned by Lady Violet, alone. In her private chambers. Have you come to try and convince me to leave again? Vivian asked bluntly. No. The Countess replied with a calm that chilled. This time I've come to ask you, for my daughter. Vivian blinked. It was the first time Lady Violet used the word, daughter, without possession in her tone. Evelyn? Yes. I know Gabriel loves you. And I know you feel something for him. But you and I both know what will happen if you appear by his side tonight. Vivian remained silent. Because she knew it was true. Today. All of the aristocracy will be here. Dukes. Earls. Heirs. Evelyn's future could be sealed with a single favorable glance, or ruined by the smallest shadow. And you believe I am that shadow? No. But the conversation will be. If you appear beside Gabriel. Even for a moment, everything will change. Vivian swallowed hard. But she didn't look away. What do you want from me? Lady Violet stepped closer, for the first time without arrogance. Only with a sincerity as hard as her character. Disappear tonight. Not for you. Not for me. For her. And then she said what Vivian did not expect. I didn't know how to protect Evelyn. You did. Vivian felt a pain that had no shape or voice. Because in that plea, there was something crueler than disdain. The weight of a shared truth. The music began to play. The guest carriages kept arriving. Greetings. Laughter. and eyes scanning every gesture filled the air. Lord Ashford stood at the top of the stairs, eyes fixed on the entrance hall. For the first time in years, his heart beat with hope. He was waiting for Vivian, hoping to see her descend in her pearl gray dress, hair pinned up, with that gaze that made him forget everything he was. But the orchestra moved on to the next piece. And she didn't come down. Not in that minute. Not in the next. Not even when Evelyn was presented before everyone as the jewel of Blackthorne House. He remained there, motionless, until he understood. And though he didn't know it then, Vivian was watching him from a window in the east wing, hidden behind a curtain. Not out of cowardice, but out of love. The kind of love that doesn't need to be seen to be real. The kind of love that sacrifices itself, so as not to ruin what it loves most. End of Book 1. The story doesn't end here. In the second book of the Scandal in the Season saga, Evelyn Blackthorne will be officially presented to society. A new world of appearances, promises, and betrayals awaits her, and not everyone is ready for what's to come. Thank you for joining me in this beautiful story. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did sharing it with you. If you liked it, I invite you to subscribe to my YouTube channel Whispers by Maga Audiobooks, so you never miss any of my upcoming releases. And if this story touched your heart, please leave a comment. Tell me what you thought. And share this audiobook with someone who also loves historical romance. We'll meet again soon, and may the magic always be with you.